Welcome to my 10th video, which I should probably stop saying these are the last one for this series, but hopefully the last one for this first chapter of Building the World. And in this one, we're going to get the edge transitions so that when I walk off the top of the screen, that's using the starting position from that other map. But so when I walk off the top of the screen, it will jump me between the different overworld maps and kind of warp me around. Because we've successfully done point transitions such as the cave. But we want to get edge transitions working as well, and then also discuss how we could set up like invisible walls and all of that to get different styles. So this is, again, going to be more on the scripting side than on the Unity editor side. So let's knock out some of this early stuff that we would need to do. So let's start with, first let's rename this scene transition because it takes you to the cave. So I'm going to call this scene transition cave. And then I need a new one. And let's clear this guy's transform. And we want this one to go to the bottom here. And I'm going to edit its collider to cover the region that I want the transition to happen from. So I'm going to start doing it like this, and then I'll remake it so that we can do the whole edge, so you can see both styles. So this one, if I walk off anywhere here, it's going to take me to that next zone. One of the most important things we have to be careful about is there is no offset on this collider. So I'm just forcibly set that to 0, which may cause me to have to remove this, move it around, I mean. But either way, you just need to make sure that offset is 0 for this to work properly. And so it looks fine. Let's make this -5 just to make the math a little bit easier. So this is a scene transition. Let's call this scene transition south. And instead of being a point exit, my exit side is on the south. Offset is fine. Scene to load is overworld south. But I don't know the position yet, but I can always read the mouse over, and I can see that the new line character worked. And it said that if I'm exiting south and north, to set Y to 0 and to set X to the exit on the other scene. So let's go look at that other scene. So we're going to jump to save this. We're going to go to the overworld south, and I'm going to build that same size of a collider. It is important that it is the same size. So if I don't remember the size of it, this thing was basically 3.5. Let's go make that 3.5 exactly. All right, so now back to the south. And I'm going to drag in a scene transition. I'm going to reset its transform. If I recall, this is actually pretty high up on the Y. Alright. And I wanted the size to be 3.5. And I'm pretty much free to place this wherever I would like to place it. So I want to place it there. So I can see the X and Y position of this scene transition. I'm going to take a snip of it real quick just so I don't forget. I'm going to rename this to scene transition north. And it needs to be an exit side of north, and I'll have to come back and figure out the position of the other one, but I'll save this. We're going to go back to the other overworld. And this one's target, so remember it says to set the, if I'm going north and south, set the Y to 0 and set the X to the other exit X. Well, this one's X is 5, so I'm going to set my X to 5. And I'm going to screen grab this one so I don't forget its x. Its x is -5. So let's jump over to overworld south, go to the scene transition. Its player destination position, remember that if we're going north and south, we want to set the x to -5. Okay, so we've got our transitions configured. And now to work on that script. So we're going to start by pulling up the scene transitions script, which is here. We do need to make this a little bit more elaborate, so let's begin. Start with inside of the on trigger enter by making this compare the tag of the thing that it's hitting to be making sure that it's the player and that it's not a trigger. The player will eventually have another trigger on them so that they can activate switches and stuff, and that'll be a trigger. So we want to make sure it's the core player collider, so we don't want any like trigger colliders floating around the player. So if it is the player, then we'll do all this stuff. So this part right here, where we're storing the location, that's actually, this is only for if the exit side is a point exit. And then we'll do the calculations for everything else. So, first up, we need to calculate the relative position of the player to the exit collider. And so let's get the vector to the exit center will be transform.position. We'll do the player center is going to be the collision, which is the other thing that we're colliding into, transform.position. Sometimes it might make more sense to rename this to other, and I actually usually like to rename that to other, which will mean that I have to change a few of these. Because that makes more sense. This is the other thing you're colliding into. So I'm going to set the player center to the other thing's transform.position, and then exit center to this thing's. And the difference is going to be the player center minus the exit center. Could have done that in one line, but I like doing this out in separate lines to make it a little bit clearer. Then we need to calculate an offset based on the size of the player's collider. And this is so that if if you're making a version of this where the player is bigger or not exactly the same size as mine, it will dynamically figure out how big your player is, where the player's collider is, and correctly move the player in that far from the edge of the screen. So this is actually kind of important. You could just do a blanket of moving them in of always one whole unit, but by doing it this way, we can be more exact and more precise. And what happens if your player's bigger than one unit? Then that just won't work. So we'll call this player collider offset. And this actually, the offset's going to be different based on what type of exit you have. So if your exit size is from the south, exit direction dot south, then we need to adjust the Y position. Player collider offset is equal to this is pulling the offset that we had up here. Negative offset plus the other, which is the player, how much their collider is adjusted on the Y position, plus the size of that collider. Now the math behind this did take a little while to compute. This is times here. Where am I making my mistake? I forgot the y here. So, yeah, the math, if you wanted to play around with that, you can kind of see. But this is, so when I'm exiting from the south, that means I need to be coming up on the north of the target map by a certain amount. In the north, the bottom edge is going to be 0. So what this offset needs to do, oh, I'm sorry, if we're exiting from the south, that means we're exiting off the south and we're appearing on the north. The offset's negative because this, let's just say the map is 20 tiles big. The y value up here is 20, so we come in down some of that, and then we figure out how much of an offset we need to adjust by, based on how, because like if the player collider is moved south, we'll need to move us south too. This is usually a negative value because the collider's at our feet. All right. And so let's do essentially something very similar for the north. We're exiting off to the north. A lot of these are just going to be inverted. So instead, offset will be positive, and this will just be made negative. And so if we exit off to the east, here we're going to use a positive offset, and instead we're going to, if your collider isn't lined up in the center on your left and right, you've got other problems. And we'll just use the size of the X. Switch this to X. And this will then use a negative offset. And then minus the bounds. So take a moment to make sure that that math looks right. Make sure all of your negative signs are in the correct spot, because we will have more stuff to be computed. So next up is to start to store all this. So we'll store the exit side first, and that's going to be in, what do we call it? Player location storage. Dot. Exit equals exit side. So this is that scriptable object. We're tracking which side we exited from. And then now we have to update the position. So that's why we did all these computations. So what we're going to store, and actually, you know what, we can do some of that here. So if exit side is south or exit side is north, then we want to set the difference to the difference y to 0. And then we're going to do something similar if it's east or west. If it's east or west, we'll set the difference x to 0. And then the last part of this, storing the location, it's going to be player location storage dot spawning point is equal to, and we're going to use this player destination position plus the difference that we calculated plus the collider offsets. And so that's a lot of different things. So this is just where we're telling us to send the player, plus how different of a location we were from the collider. Like if we were like 2 units to the left of the collider, well, when we appear in the bottom, we need to be 2 units to the left. And then this adjusts for how fat the player is, affecting either Y or X, depending. And then we load the new scene. So again, like I said, take a moment to maybe pause the video, make sure that all of this looks correct, because that's a lot of computational stuff. This is probably one of the more computational heavy parts of our project. We only have a little bit of work to do in the player, which involves actually spawning the player. All right, so we're moving to the player now. So, well, this was great if we're just doing a single point. So, first up, we need to, we could probably just grab it from the camera. So let's actually jump over to camera follow. And I'm going to steal this X-Men, all those. And I can do camera dot main dot get component. And I called this camera follow dot X-Men. Probably would have been cool if we made those static variables. All right, and so we're going to do the same thing for all of these. Do X max. And then we'll switch these to be Ys. Save us a little bit of effort, but we're just going to grab it straight from the camera. And we need that because when we spawn in, based on the direction we're spawning in, if we're spawning in like on the southern edge of the screen, we need to know what the Y minimum is to calculate where it is, because each map can be its own size. So we're just going to dynamically figure out how big or where the edges of the map are to actually to spawn the player. So let's make one for the start, the thing that we're going to pull from the, I'll call it X start. And that's going to come from our starting position dot spawn position dot X. And we'll do the Y start. And I'm doing this just to kind of make the code easier and cleaner to read in the bottom part, because we could have just done all of this on one line, but I don't think that that's going to be very good. And then we'll determine where to spawn the player. We need to use an if statement here. If starting position dot exit is equal to scene transition dot exit direction dot point. So if it was like a cave type of transition, we do that. Else if, copy that. If the exit was a south exit, then by transform dot position will be a new vector 2. So if we're coming out of the south, that means we're spawning on the top of the map. So if we're spawning on the top of the map, then we're just going to use the X value from the spawner, and then we'll do the Y max with the modifier from that spawning script. And that's going to be what the rest of these look like. Just different variations of that. So the north one will be the Y min. The west one we're just going to then use the y start here, but instead it'll be x start plus, if it's west, it'll be coming in on the max, I think. And then this will use the x min if we're on the east. And that is all the player location spawning stuff. So actually, let's make a method out of that. Let's just call this private void setup player location. And I'm going to actually copy all of that into there. And we're just going to call the method setup player location. Reason I'm doing that is because then I can click this magical minimize button and I won't have to see that. So here's what you should definitely take note of. So again, take a minute, maybe pause the video, make sure all of this matches before we get to the next spot, because this was a lot of very computational based coding. So I'm going to continue now. Hopefully there's no errors. Otherwise, I'll be back to here. Okay. With those changes made, I've got to recompile some scripts. And now let's take a look at the overworld, because that's the only correct starting position we've got. Hit play. And let's see what happens when we walk off this edge. Uh-oh. Might have done a little bit of math wrong. Or maybe I flagged it wrong. Let's take a look. Exit side is south. So perhaps I flagged it wrong. So if I'm doing the south, let's see. Yeah, it looks right. Perhaps I'm pulling it incorrectly off of here. Now let's take a look and see what happens going the other direction. And actually, it might be me pulling it from the camera may not be the best decision. Yeah. Oh, I didn't put a transition from there. Let's go put a transition here. So let's bring in a scene transition. It really likes to spawn them there. And this scene transition is going to be right about there. Increase the collider. Make sure it does not have an offset. And the size will be 1.6. Rename this to scene transition east. And let's go set its exit side to be east. Hit save. So we'll want to set the Y value on the target one. So let's go take a look at where that will come in on east. Let's put a scene transition in. Reset the transform. Then the size was 1.6. And so it looks like it's a Y value of 8 or of 7 here, and this exit is going to be west. So we want to set a Y value of 7 over to the other one. All right, hit save. And let's go look at the east. So this one will want to go to a y value of 1. Alright, let's take a look at what's going to happen. So back to the original overworld. And when we jump over to it, oops, it took us to the cave. I think I did not set the correct name. So this needs to go to, instead of cave 1, overworld east. Save. And then the one in overworld east needs to take me back to overworld instead of cave 1. And save that. Back to overworld. Let's go jump off that side again. And so that one popped us over. When we return, ooh, getting a weird position there. I wonder what that's related to. Let's see, does the player have storage vector? Yep. Okay, it took a west exit. So the one thing that I am noticing, if I hit unpause, and it put me here, that it seems to be inconsistent about calculating some of these things. So what could be related to this, I might be better off trying to pull the ground myself. So let's see. Have to use tile maps. So we'll get the ground, and instead of using the camera, let's instead just pull it from ground dot local bounds dot min dot x. See if that makes a difference. So if we exited to the south, that means, yeah, we should be using the Y max. So I think there might be something incorrect with that. So let's try. And that fixed it. That is... So I'm guessing when the player loads... Oops, didn't set that right. When the player loads, maybe it loads before the camera does. And as a result, it pulls those initial value of 0 out of it. So what that kind of makes me want to do, if I want to go over to opening up the camera follow script, I'm just going to make these private because they aren't reliable enough to trust. So I've set those to private, and that's kind of interesting. All right, so with that change, we can now walk off the edge, and what you'll notice is if I walk off on the side here, I appear on the side there. Like I actually kind of keep... Now I'm getting bumped actually, so you'll see when I come up here I'm getting kind of pushed, and that's actually because there's that collider that's bumping into me. And we can kind of play around with that if we want. And so this one should transition. If I'm on the top here, I'm on the top there. And I think that's the collider maybe causing some trouble again. So what I believe is happening in that case is it's transitioning in such a way that it's getting pushed into this. So what we could try to do is maybe move these colliders back a little bit. Let's see. Actually, doesn't look like it's adding the X offset well enough to this one. So there seems to be something wrong with the west transition. It strikes me as a scene transition problem, and I think I found it. Right here, it's not doing this correctly. That should have been west. So double check that, make sure that that matches. But anyway, as far as these colliders go, if you want to keep like the enemies from bumping into them, if you can actually get away making these colliders a little bit bigger. And that'll keep enemies from traveling off the screen, but yet still let the player bump into that exit collider. And so now we've got a good, clean transition on this. And that may have been related to that error on that if statement. And then over here, stupid collider, we can transition, and it looks pretty smooth for all of that. So the only other thing that you can really kind of do, and we're definitely getting up there on time, is with this, we could expand this to actually be the entire size of the transition. So you could let the players walk off the entire edge instead of forcing them to have to go through only the road. So if I do this, remember I have to not have any offset, so I've got to clear that offset to 0, and then I can reposition this because that center matters. And maybe I'll knock the size to 9.5, just making it a little bit easier. So what I really care about is that Y position of this, which appears to be -0.6. And so the targeting transition from the other side, let's hit save, and let's screenshot all this. So that I know that the other collider needs to be 9.5 and my target is -0.6. So this thing, to match the same size, is going to be 9.5, and I can move it. Let's go 5.5? 5.5 looks good. So this destination, instead of the destination being 1, based on the position of what we had here, it needs to be -0.6. And the other one needs to take me to 5.5. So instead of taking me to 7, when I redid it, it is now 5.5. Which then means I can actually kind of clean up these invisible walls. I'd only need 1. And let's consider doing so on the east. And you can see that if I just leave this wall, I think it should be fine. Because the player will touch the exit and cause the transition, because the player's going to hit both of them simultaneously. Alright, let's go exit to the side. Takes me here. If I walk off like right above the fence, you can see that it's bringing me, if I'm like right above the different color grass, same thing, right above the different color grass here. Up on the cliff, up on the cliff. And I think that's going to be probably one of our better approaches to screen transitions. Now, a few things to note, like monsters and stuff are going to respawn. We're going to handle that in time as we get to that. I've got just an invisible wall blocking here. But you can see that even though that this side does have an invisible wall, I'm able to transition just as easily. So it's up to you how you want to set your exit colliders on the sides. If you only want like paths to let you off, so like here I can't transition, but if I walk across on the path, it does transition me. So you're kind of free to set, and you can even move the colliders back a little bit. So like if you want to have the player have to walk a little bit more off, bump it back like that. And now the player is going to have to take a few more steps off the edge of the screen to actually transition. And so you can see now I've got to like walk a little bit more to get to transition. So really, the choice is kind of yours with however you want to set some of this stuff up, and kind of craft your level transitions. But with what we've got now, you've got the tools to set up however you want to kind of walk off the stages. I've got my edges, and I've got my cave. And then it correctly puts me back to the starting location that I want. So that was quite the journey, but this wraps up our first set of lessons, which kind of detail building the world. So at this point, you would know how to open new tile sets. You could make a snow tile set. You could make whatever tile sets you want, and you'd be able to build stages and connect the stages. So the next lesson is going to feature player attacks. So we're going to start adding an a melee attack and a ranged attack, and then after that, the next main lesson is enemies, and then the following main lesson is interaction with the environment. So a mixture of switches, puzzles, traps, hazards. So thank you for watching, and good luck with building some stages.